What's really misunderstood or not understood at all is that there's a testosterone receptor on every organ in the body. So this does affect your brain, your cardiovascular system, your bone health, your muscle health, yes, your libido, mitochondrial biogenesis or oxidative stress. These are things that affect your mitochondria and effectively how healthy your cells are, and downstream, what does that mean for your overall body? So big picture is that testosterone has a role all across your body.
Hello, fam. Welcome to another episode of Better with Dr. Stephanie. It's me, your host, Dr. Stephanie Estima. Today, we are talking all about testosterone replacement therapy for women. Now, certainly, we are going to talk about this for men because it's very well established in the literature. But if you are someone who is experiencing brain fog, you used to be able to make decisions and now you feel like you are a former shell. You are a shell of your former self. If you are finding that you're not able to make your squat numbers anymore or your deadlift numbers, your strength in the gym is starting to deteriorate despite doing all the right things, or things like sleep. You notice that your sleep is trash no matter what you do and you have all the sleep hygiene dialed in. This is going to be a conversation for you. My guest today is Shalin Shah. He is the Chief Executive Officer at Marius Pharmaceuticals, where he led the development and the FDA approval of oral testosterone called Kysotrex. This is the first oral testosterone therapy for men with low testosterone due to medical conditions. Now, keep in mind that we talk a lot about off-label use of testosterone for females in this conversation, because as of this recording in North America currently, there are no approved products for testosterone in women. So a lot of our conversation is around the off-label use and how to do that. I understand that we now have in Australia and the United Kingdom, we have products that are available for females. But as of this recording in North America, we are still working on it. So a lot of our conversation is, okay, what does the body of evidence suggest around men, around metabolism, around libido, around muscle mass, around cognitive function, and how can we extrapolate that and apply it to our women should the physicians who are listening to this show decide to use this product or any other testosterone product off label. So this is going to be important for you as a consumer to learn about some of the clinical signs and symptoms of low testosterone in your own life, and also how to bridge this conversation with your primary care physician, because there are a lot of myths around testosterone that still perseverate today around cardiovascular risk, around prostate, cancer risk, certainly in men. And we talk about all of these in the studies that have really been shown to sort of myth bust, if you will. So I hope that you take a lot out of this conversation. I certainly did. And without further delay, please enjoy my conversation with Shalin Shah. All right, Shalin, welcome to the show. I'm happy to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
We are going to be talking about testosterone and women, which is potentially a very spicy controversial topic. And I think I want to start off by helping the audience understand, especially when they're in the context of speaking with their physician, what is the fundamental misunderstanding around the role of testosterone in the female body? And I think maybe as a ground rule, we can talk about the role of testosterone in men as well. And then as a comparative, the analog for the misunderstanding around the role of testosterone in the female body.
So, yeah, the easy place to start is on the male side, because, folks barely even consider it a female hormone today, even though it absolutely is, right? Testosterone is a male and female hormone, just like estrogen is a female and male hormone. Same thing. So on the male side, it's often pigeonholed in terms of muscle building because of all the history around steroids and sports, or it's really sexual health, right? That this is going to make guys sort of, just drive to crazy levels of sexual activity or something like that, which is far from the case. But what's really misunderstood or not understood at all is that there's an androgen receptor or a testosterone receptor on every organ in the body. So this does affect your brain, your cardiovascular system, your bone health, your muscle health, yes, your libido, and even all the way down to the cellular level. Mitochondria, which is becoming more and more discussed today and understood, mitochondrial biogenesis or oxidative stress. These are things that affect your mitochondria and effectively how healthy your cells are, and downstream, what does that mean for your overall body? So big picture is that testosterone has a role all across your body. It is not a single category, And that really is very similar on the female side as well. Yes, our bodies are different. They do function slightly differently. But at large, a lot of those parameters that you see on the male side are equally happening on the female side as well.
Yeah, and to your point, I think we phenotypically ascribe estrogen as the female hormone. Testosterone, we often say, oh, this is the male hormone. But we have more testosterone in our bodies than we have estrogen. Even if you just look at the way that we measure a T, it's usually like nanograms per deciliter. Estrogen's like picograms per milliliter. So even there's like an order of like 3, it's like 10 to the minus, my goodness, is that like minus 12 and then 10 to the minus 15. So there's like orders of magnitude more testosterone in the female body. Certainly
Correct.
When we compare men to women, we're going to have like 10 to 20 times less T than men. But this is one of the, especially in the menopause and the perimenopause conversation now, with the Women's Health Initiative essentially denying women hormone therapy for the better part of 20 years. I think that conversation is now swinging to the other direction. But the most often in that MHT or HRT conversation is progesterone and estrogen. And like, do you have a uterus? Then you're going to use this. And if you don't have a uterus, then you're going to use that, et cetera. And I think that the testosterone piece of HRT is often left out. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about some of the clinical signs and symptoms. Again, male, and then I'd like you to carve out for female for our female listeners. What are some of the clinical signs and symptoms of low testosterone?
So some of the first things that show up on the male side, which unfortunately still get dismissed as general aging often, but it is around energy. Feeling that afternoon drag is certainly one of the main ones that show up in the male side. And you also see things like sexual dysfunction, that loss of libido, that does happen. The inability to put on muscle mass, right? So all the positive aspects of the therapy often do manifest as the symptoms, the inability to burn fat. So these things are pretty common on the male side, but they're equally common on the female side too, right? And I think, as most of your listeners will know, even the body comp, I think that's probably one of the first things that the female sees too, right?
Biggest frustration.
You're working, eating, hitting the gym, but you're not seeing those results. It's often a hormonal imbalance, and it doesn't have the underlying fuels to make the changes that would have otherwise occurred if you were in a hormonal balance.
Talk to me about sleep and cognitive function, because again, like you hit the nail on the head with the body composition. That is probably the most common thing that I'll hear from women. It's like, I don't know what it is. I'm doing literally the same thing I was doing when I was 35. And now I'm 45 and my waist is disappearing. I'm accumulating belly fat at a rate that I'm unhappy with. Clothes are not fitting the way that they used to. So body composition, one. Sleep is the other early sign. I find a lot of women will, turn 42 and then it's like, and I can't sleep. So talk to us about sleep, how testosterone might influence sleep drive and sleep pressure. And then also I'd like to talk about brain function and cognitive function as well.
So I'll start on even the cognitive function. So yeah, these are the receptors across the brain. So again, on the male side and female side, this is
Analogous.
Actually one of the interesting things. Actually, if you look at a lot of the Alzheimer's data as well, so you can look at like tau protein accumulation, and if you look at low testosterone patients at older levels, and you'll see higher tau protein accumulations. Full stop. Right. So I think there are clearly neuroactivity levels that are happening with appropriate testosterone levels and effectively fueling that cognitive function, and same thing on the sleep side. And I've heard this anecdotally. We don't actually have, in terms of Kaiser data on it yet, but I've heard anecdotally from patients within weeks of starting therapy that sleep is markedly different. And I thought that was pretty outstanding or resounding, if you will, that you can see those kind of impacts and how quickly that they manifest on that male side, but again, equally translating to the female side. And now you have wearables. I think that's another beauty that you can kind of put into this equation, is you can really understand what those impacts are in a short amount of time, whether that is on primarily REM sleep and deep sleep.
Yeah. I know that for men, it's a little bit more cut and dry, right? So it's like, yeah, I started taking testosterone and I'm sleeping better and I'm making, better decisions. I feel like that brain fog has lifted. But this is, again, another very common, it's hard to tease out when you're in it because it's such a slow and gradual decline. It's almost like you habituate to to this
new
worse,
normal.
and it's your new normal, exactly. So one of the challenges, I think, and maybe we can talk a little bit about testing and looking at levels of free testosterone and SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, what those mean, and how we might, as a male or a female, because I know it's a little bit different, figure out what the right level of testosterone is for us. So talk to us a little bit about the mechanisms in terms of what's happening when T gets lower, what happens to SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, and then what are some of the ranges that we want to be considering for both a male patient, and I know there's a huge variability here, and then as well for a female patient.
So I think diagnostics is certainly the best place to start, and something that we advocate a lot more for. I mean, again, standard blood panels don't include testosterone today, even though it is in a lot of instances the single most telling biomarker you can draw on, right? Because you're taking a look into your cardiovascular function, your inflammation, your glucose metabolism, your insulin sensitivity, and so on. But in terms of what we would test, it would start relatively simple. You can look at your total testosterone. You have to look at your free testosterone. You have to look at your SHBG, because again, ultimately, I think that's where the conversation is really going to go, is free testosterone and SHBG, both on male and females. We see elevated male side as you get older. Females often have elevated SHBGs because of historical birth control use, right? That drives these levels much higher.
Yeah.
We do like to look at LH and FSH. I think there's a really interesting paradigm shift that's happening with daily oral testosterone and your diurnal rhythm, and what's happening then, the impacts on LH and FSH. So those are some of the common things that you should certainly be testing for. But again, I think free testosterone is going to take the lion's share of the conversation if you go forward, because that is what is actually available for your body to use and bind to receptors.
Yeah. And this, when we're looking at this from a female perspective, this is where I think that added layer of complexity comes in, because as of this recording, as of today, there's only an approved product, I think, in Australia. And then I think you mentioned that the UK, they just approved a testosterone product for females.
Correct.
So, and the only way, if you are in North America at this point, to get access to testosterone as a woman is to have a physician who's willing to prescribe it for you off label. And certainly there are. But the only indicated, on label, if you will, reason that a woman might qualify to get testosterone right now is hyposexual desire disorder. So I think that there's, and you mentioned before testosterone for muscle mass and libido for men, which is wonderful. But I think that we have to also be thinking as clinicians, and I think just as the healthcare system as a whole, if you are assuming a heterosexual couple, okay, if you are just treating one half of the couple, right? So if you have, if a 45-year-old male or 55-year-old male who is being treated for ED or low T or whatever it is, he's on TRT, and he's ready to go, and he's like, the penis is happy, right? Like he's ready to kind of like, put it to use. But then on the other side, you have a woman who has declining testosterone and some of the other reproductive hormones. That's a disaster.
Big mismatch. And honestly, you're almost exasperating it, right? Like if you're already this off generally, right? And then you go even further in that direction. If it's a male is being put on testosterone, for example, and the female's not being treated, I think, these are train wrecks, and you have to treat both couples. And we see, we see that with a lot of the clinicians that we deal with. The wives are often in the practice, in the appointments with the males, and they become patients then instantly, because they say, okay, what about me? And then, yes, luckily a lot of the sexual health doctors are able to treat both. But yeah, it's an incredibly important sort of equation that can't be ignored. And yeah, frankly, I think there has to be a lot more education on it, so you don't have this train wreck for couples. Full stop.
I remember there was a friend of mine who was saying that they went on a menopause cruise or something, and there was a divorce lawyer there, and she was saying something to the effect of, I literally think I would be out of a job, like because of the lack of access to hormones for women for the last 20 or so years since the WHI. I would literally be out of a job. Like there's so much divorce that happens in midlife, and part of it, I think, certainly can be traced back to the mismatch that we're describing, right? So we are able to, a male walks into a physician's office and he has a full suite of options available to him in terms of treating a variety of, whether it's sexual disorders or just generally hormone optimization.
Right.
And I think that most women, just want to have the option to age like men. It's like, I just want to have a suite of options available to me, and I can make an informed decision with my primary healthcare provider to age well in the same way that we've afforded our beautiful men.
No, I totally agree. And I've seen it sort of firsthand, right? Like, look, men have it easy in comparison. And I've seen in my own household, right, how hormones have changed and how that affects downstream. It's just not just mood, right? It's overall health, and even things when you look at like female gut health versus male gut health, and there are differences there. So yeah, I'm a full supporter of that, and I think that's where the education really has to come in, because women need more. Like, it's a more complex system, right? So you have to get into these greater details, but then you need providers that can go and help the journey. And I'm starting to see it a little bit. Honestly, I've heard from a lot of females that I've spoken to that now they're, gynecologists or someone may recommend, like, please go see a functional doctor because I can't do this, right? And I think that actually does, as much as that's not necessarily helpful, that's the first time that I've started to hear that and kind of mark a shift to realize or recognize that the females or the female system needs more support, and, the tools need to be addressed. So again, I think that's progress. I think, shows like this, obviously educating, and, you asked a question around the normal range, for example, right? Like helping people understand where they should be or what's optimal too, because normal has been sort of decimated if you think about it, right? If you look at the male normal range, which is wider, it's just continued to come down and down over the years and decades now. And now, a lot of lab reference systems even have as low as like 268, 250 as normal. Right? When this used to be 400, right? Yeah. And that's, so, again, then you get thrown into the bucket that says, okay, everything looks good, can't help you, right? Or insurance is not going to cover it. You're going to have to look somewhere else. I think we have to reframe that normal. People need to understand what's that, optimal for them. And that's why testing is important earlier and earlier, because I may be, say, 500, 600 is my normal at, 25, 30. Then when I'm 50, I know that's probably where I need to be at to be optimal. Somebody might need to be 1,000 because that's what they were when they're younger. So it's really important to be able to allow diagnostics and like history to be tracked appropriately.
One of the things that hormone therapy, at least I hear a lot of the clinicians who are dosing and prescribing and managing patients with HRT, particularly females, is that they are not necessarily looking at labs, but they are looking at the patient's symptomatology, right? So does she feel brain foggy? Is she forgetting things? Are we starting to see vasomotor, signs and symptoms? But to your point, I think that there's something to be said, especially when, air quotes, we're going to say normal. I think that the better word is maybe common, right? So as we are starting to see over the last several decades, we've started to see these numbers, as you alluded to, get lower and lower and lower. And we have huge ranges now, like you were saying, like 300 to 1,200 nanograms per deciliter. That's an incredibly large range. So it is very important for men. I'm referencing for men. I think so there is value in understanding, if you are a young person, or if you have a young person in your life that you love and care about, maybe encouraging them when they are in their 20s to have some kind of, that would be ideal, to have some kind of baseline when you're like 25-ish. And then you can sort of track that over the arc of that person's life. But I did have a question around what you think may be happening to testosterone levels in general. I had, like I was saying, I had Shauna Swan on the show, and she was saying like 2-point-something% decline in testosterone per year, which is and she was referring to men, which I think is petrifying. I think that's, there's comments that you can make on the future of the human race if we continue to see declines like that. What do you think are some of the contributing factors to this persistent and almost predictable at this point lowering of testosterone levels in men?
From our perspective, it's generally two sides here. You have a lifestyle component that is driving this lower level of testosterone, but you also have an environmental component, and I think there are some underlying similarities there, or cross currents, if you will. I mean, again, we are generally unhealthy lifestyles, and sedentary is driving higher levels of obesity, and our inactivity levels are higher than ever, per se. So that drives, again, that does have an effect on your hormone production. There's also a lot of environmental factors, though. If you think about our food or microplastics or things that are in the water, in that sense, these are all pretty much part of society. I don't think you can try to remove some of these. I mean, even fragrances, right? For the longest time, I don't wear cologne anymore because I would not put on a fragrance on my body, or the skin, the lotions and the soaps. All of these things have the chemicals that have penetrated our body, right? These are all endocrine disruptors, and it's very hard to get those out. That's literally sort of being ingrained and retranscripted into our genetic code. So you can do some of it. I think a big one that I think is the intersection of the lifestyle and environmental is sleep and screens. This has become so embedded in our our culture, our society, whatever it is. So I don't blame the folks that are up at midnight and 1 a.m. like scrolling. That's just become, our brains have been rewired by technology, and our bodies don't know how to handle that, right? So I think there is a component that is you can take control of and try and correct, but you can't, it's difficult to do all of that. And I think that is massively affecting our hormone production.
Do you think that there are ways for us to reliably increase our own natural levels of T? Male or female?
I think so. Short answer is yes. Longer answer is a little complicated, in the sense that, can you lose 10 to 20% of your body weight and see some increases in your T levels? Yes. But these are often, to the tune of 50, 100 points potentially, which again, really may only put you at that lower end of normal, if that at all. So there are lifestyle improvements that you can do, but you have to also look at, again, those signs and symptomology that we talked about earlier. So if you don't have the energy, it's going to be difficult for you to be less sedentary, like to do the things that you need to do. You need to get into a virtuous cycle. So, and I'm not saying testosterone is the cure-all by any means, but if, say, you're able to restore your testosterone levels and you do have better energy, and you do end up going in the gym, 3-4 days a week, better than zero. And even by that nature, you start eating better because you're more encouraged. You're doing things in a positive fashion. And again, that's why I use the upward spiral or virtuous cycle. And maybe after 1-2 years, you are in a much better metabolic place. And naturally, your T levels could be higher. Could you stop therapy? Absolutely. But first, get there. I think that's really the point, that we need to use the tools in our toolbox to get there. Not everything is this, I don't know, let's call it a willpower. If you have the willpower, you can make it happen, and that's it. Like, I don't think that's fair to the general population to expect that.
It's very similar to GLP-1s as well, right? There's still a stigma, I think, around GLP-1s, feeling like you're cheating, feeling like you're not doing the right thing, but it gives you that energy, right? It also gives you that dopamine, or like almost that boost of energy and drive to actually do the right things that you have to be doing. I think, and redirect me here if I'm wrong, but I think that you have to marry both of those things. This is where we have like a marriage of, pharmacology and lifestyle. Like the two things, you can't just take testosterone and think that you're going to grow glutes and shoulders and whatever else you want to, whatever you want to do. You still have to put in the work, but it's going to help it's going to help you overcome that inertia that would otherwise preclude you from doing the things that you know that you should be doing.
Absolutely. No, it's a synergistic thing. And I think you can include, yes, foundational health items such as, diet, sleep, stress, exercise. And then above that sits hormones, and you have to optimize those. And that kind of works as a positive feedback loop. And yeah, same with GLP-1s. Throw GLP-1s in the mix. Testosterone can be an important component of that, because say you want to talk about lean muscle mass, right? How do you preserve this? Yes, you need to have the appropriate strength training, the appropriate nutrition and protein intake, but again, an anabolic component certainly is I think this is the future of that's why companies are already chasing muscle preservation in terms of GLP-1s with myostatin inhibitors, which frankly haven't worked out yet, and other components. But that is really the future, especially if you think about an aging population that's at risk of like sarcopenia and frailty, hip fractures, etc. Muscle is that currency. I'm sure we run in the same circles where a lot of people are talking how important that is. Even if you look at longevity conversation, it's going to boil down to strength, VO2 max, and body composition.
Yep.
It is sort of as simple as that. So what are the interventions that are driving those kind of outcomes? But one thing I think is important to know is things like with testosterone, we are always advocating for physiologic doses, right? Whether that's male or female. And that's important to remember in the sense that, again, I'm going to pick on GLP-1s a little bit. At these really high doses of GLP-1s, often you have like 4 times the amount of typical GLP-1 crossing the blood-brain barrier, right? Like we can't advocate for something like that in testosterone where you're running at 4 times super physiologic levels. Like we are just talking about physiological levels and replacing what the body doesn't have. We're not manipulating genes on or off in that sense. We're really just replacing, and that's why the safety profile is at physiologic doses really clean, because the body knows exactly what to do with it. It's not sent into overdrive and figuring out how to compensate in different directions. It's relatively straightforward.
And what about any concerns, and this is more of a female-specific question around virilization? So I've certainly, this podcast, we talk a lot about fitness and health, muscle building and cardio, like the audience, like, oh, there she goes again, talking about sprinting and VO2 max and deadlifting and all the things. But especially, and I competed many, many years ago, but in the bodybuilding world, in physique competitors, even today, if you look at bikini, like all the girls, like as beautiful as they are, they're all in gear. What is the concern or potential risk with something when we are looking at physiological doses? Do we have concerns around virilization? When I say that, for those of you that might not be familiar with that might be things like changes in your voice. That might be like bone, often you'll see women with very pronounced mandibles. You might even see growth of the clitoris, right? So you'll see an enlargement of the clitoris. So is that a risk with some of the doses that we're talking about if this were to be used off-label for women?
So again, generally female testosterone is dosed at 1/10 the dose of a male, right? And I think where this conversation or this sort of side effect issues really stem is when that isn't 1/10 of a dose. And again, frankly, this stems from a lot of pellet therapy today, right? That's a major modality that is used in females, and the levels are often super physiologic. And the problem is not necessarily always super physiologic levels if they are basically pulsatile and temporary, right? So if they were coming, hitting a peak during the day and coming back down during the same day, that would be one thing. But often on pellet therapy, you have a super physiologic level for an extended period of time.
Months.
Yeah,
months.
Exactly. And unfortunately, it's sort of being sold to women, right? And they hear stories about why, their friends feel so good, so they obviously get on. But then once that pellet's in there, it's not coming out for these 3-4 months. So that's really when you see these side effects peak more often. If you're at physiologic doses, and again, we're going to do the work for this. We just announced our female advisory board this morning, and we're going to start our clinical trials specifically designed for female and to drive an FDA-approved product. But I do not think at physiologic doses you are going to see anywhere close to the side effect profiles that you do regarding pellets.
Well, let's actually talk about the different modes of delivery. So we've talked a little bit about oral. I think that it's important for us to sort of set the stage here, because when we used to think about oral testosterone, this was very much hepatotoxic, so it's very much toxic to the liver. You've mentioned pellets. Let's actually talk about some of the different modes of delivery that's available for testosterone right now, on label or off, and then maybe why Kaisertrex is it's an oral testosterone. If I'm
correct, oral testosterone. Yep.
It's oral. So why is this not hepatotoxic?
So I'll just quickly address that. So Kysotrex is designed to be lymphatically absorbed, so it goes through the small intestine and is absorbed there. This is a unique formulation that we've developed, and that's really why it drives down the path that it does. You do have to take it with food to activate the lymphatics, but that can be any sort of fat content meal, whether it's low fat, medium fat, etc. Versus
Just some fat.
Yeah, just some fat. Older versions of oral testosterone, yes, were liver toxic or required high amounts of fat, like 50 grams of fat with a meal to drive absorption. And, yes, we all know that that's not realistic. So the delivery system is unique and novel, and I think that's what's going to drive, and that's what drives its efficacy. In terms of the modalities, and happy to talk about both sides, right? Injections are quite common on the male side. Gels were used, a decent amount when it was a branded product and marketed, but gels have a lot of their own issues, whether it's transference risk to others, whether it's actual absorption issues or inabsorption, I should say. So that's really not too common these days. Pellets exist for both male and females. Again, I think it's used more on the female side because injections are not that common for females. It's mainly creams or pellets.
Well, the creams also have, I think you mentioned it very briefly, their own, like if you have children and you put some, even if you put on your thigh or something and then you're wearing, but if it's on your hands, it's still on your hands, there's some trace, and you're picking up your kids, and then there's going to be that transference that you mentioned, which we also want to avoid.
Exactly. So on the male products, there's a black box for transference to others, right? So it just doesn't exist because there's no female product. They have nowhere to put that warning. The compounding creams don't have to put that. But yeah, no, it's an absolute issue. I mean, again, I've seen it firsthand, and it's between, especially if you talk about your audience, right? Like we're on the go. You don't have you put this cream on, you got to wait 30 minutes for it to dry, or you're putting your clothes on top of it or whatnot. Like it doesn't fit into routines. But then also you just have variable absorption. So you don't know what you're going to get versus, again, yes, an injection, you're going to get pretty much a steady blood level, likely go super physiologic. On Kysotrex, we see if you're taking it appropriately, you're going to see a more consistent daily level.
Well, let's talk about that. How do we first maybe describe the circadian rhythm of testosterone? And then I would like to also overlay that with the infradian rhythm of testosterone for women. So whenever we talk about testosterone, it's always like highest in the morning, and then it sort of, falls out, which is very true. And then there's also, women also have this beautiful overlay of our menstrual cycle for the better part of, 40 or so years, where we see peaks of testosterone at certain points in the menstrual cycle. So how, and I know, you just announced that you're working and developing on a female specific product. How does that change the production of testosterone, whether you are a male taking Kysotrex or a female taking the female dosage, the female product once it's ready? And how does that maybe, I'll say, honor the normal rhythm of the way testosterone is actually utilized in the male and female body? Or produced, I should say, in the male and female body.
Yeah, so like most of the things in the conversation, right? Male side is relatively easy. Like you say, we peak in the morning and then decline throughout the day. So, Kysotrex effectively mimics that same, diurnal rhythm. And at the end of the day, when it's, let's call it flush from the body, that's where we see interesting data around, like, let's say LH and FSH, which don't go to zero in our data, because the hypothesis is the pituitary goes back to work, right? It's at the end of the day, it's saying, okay, there's no exogenous testosterone here. Let's get to work and let's produce what we can. So we don't.
So there's no negative feedback loop that's like, hey, stop producing this. We have so much of it.
Exactly. So it's not 100% negative feedback loop. Maybe it's 50%, right? But the factory, we like to use the analogy that, the factory is still working. You maybe turned off some equipment, some workers home, but you're still working, versus often in injection therapy, that factory is completely closed. All the machines are off. All the workers are home. So on the female side, and this, to be fair, is going to be, naturally part of the research and program. From the majority of our clinical discussions thus far, we've seen standardized dosing across the cycle or across that month. So, females are getting back up into a normal range, which they would, again, sort of typically have, but that doesn't get modified for time of month.
So it's not cyclically, you're not like progesterone sometimes is often dosed cyclically. If you're still menstruating and you figure out if you've ovulated or not, you take progesterone for the luteal phase of the cycle, and then you stop once you start bleeding again. But for testosterone, you would not do that. It would just be a consistent dose daily.
Based on what we've seen, again, I think this also stems back to, yes, do you have the ability to do that because you have an oral daily capsule? But because peaks are transient, you can really dose to a level that you feel good with throughout the entire time, because I think it actually stems down then to compliance and consistency, right? Like, what's the best therapy is something that you can be compliant and consistent with. So if I can tell you, look, you're taking 1 capsule or 2 capsules every morning, period, I think that's better than saying, okay, for this time you're taking 2 and then you're going to take 3, or you're going to take it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or every other day, right? Once you start introducing different sort of dosing schemes, although they could be ideal from a pure physiologic perspective, I don't know if they translate to real world clinical life and enough delta where you want to modify them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think when you start adding in different layers of complexity, as you're saying, like your compliance is going to go down. It's like, should I take 1 today or 2 or 3? I'm not sure, so I'm just not going to do it, right? And then you start missing days, or
it's tough, right? I mean, like, I'm not the most compliant patient, right? But even if I look at my supplement routine, when I start adding in like, okay, I got to take this one 15 minutes before the meal, some are 15 minutes after the meal. I this one needs to be taking at lunch versus evening. Like, I struggle myself.
I don't even take my electrolytes at the right time. So like typically you should take electrolytes in the morning. I end up forgetting about it until the evening. I'm like, oh, you know what? I should probably have some.
Rehydrate.
I should probably rehydrate. Yeah. And it's like, I never do it at the ideal time, but I'm at least doing it on a daily basis. So there's some kind of ritualization, which I think is at the bare minimum what you can ask from the public at large.
Right. So and again, I think like as this conversation evolves, I think we're really in the first inning of where hormone therapy is sort of, it's actually a renaissance, because I think it was there, pre-WHI and growing, and then, hit its these roadblocks. But I think so that's why I call it, we're in a renaissance, but we will continue to pare these things back and get to more and more personalization as we go. And I think that's where the things like the free tea conversations come back and what you're aiming for specifically. But right now, I think we're advocating for better diagnostics or more frequent diagnostics and the ability to treat. Like, that's more than half the battle right now is convincing, I guess let's call it traditional medicine, that this should not be ignored.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of myths around testosterone. There's a lot of, in the same way that people think estrogen, take estrogen therapy, you're going to get breast cancer. I think the same is true. You can say testosterone, you might go to a traditional doctor who's maybe not up to snuff on the latest science, might say, oh, it's cardiovascular disease or prostate if you're a male, So talk to us a little bit about some of the myths, because I really want to arm the listeners with maybe talking points that they might approach their PCP, their primary care provider, with in terms of how to gently direct or redirect misinformation around testosterone.
Yes. 2 of the biggest ones, as you mentioned rightfully, are cardiovascular risk. And this really started to come into the picture around 2013, 2014. They actually changed the labels on testosterone products and effectively, sort of shut it down, if you will, right? So cardiovascular risk, which then fast forward to 10 years later, the FDA did mandate what was the largest randomized placebo-controlled study around cardiovascular risk in testosterone therapy. That was called the Traverse trial, and that read out in June of 23. Simple conclusion, testosterone therapy does not increase the risk of cardiovascular events, period. And actually in the data, there were less CV events in the testosterone arm than the placebo arm, right? So I think actually where the conversation is going to go is how understanding testosterone's role in cardiovascular health, because if you actually look at endothelial function, it improves on testosterone therapy. So that's where I think it's going, but again, firmly, that myth still perpetuates today. Despite that study, it's going to take, usually they say it takes 10 years for these things to be fixed. I think it should be faster given the day and age of information that we're in, but that's certainly extremely damaging. And then the second, which is a long time myth, for testosterone is that testosterone causes prostate cancer on the male side, right? And this actually originally stemmed from, there was a study, it was like 1940, there were 3 patients. One was a female, so that's out. And then there were 2 guys, older males.
Nice
and
N there.
Yeah, the N was
2 people.
2. And one guy got prostate cancer, right? Like old men do. So, I think that's been firmly shown. There's saturation models to show after a certain level of testosterone level, there's no impact on the prostate. I mean, a simple way to look at it is like prostate cancer, young guys who have high levels of testosterone, what's the incident rate of prostate cancer versus old guys who have low testosterone?
Yeah. It's the same comment with breast cancer. It's like, when are you more likely to have breast cancer, as a young woman or an older woman? It's an older woman when your levels of estrogen are lower.
And so there's been studies on both sides. So like we've seen interesting data around testosterone therapy reducing incidence of prostate cancer and actually colorectal cancer. And I think some of that data exists even on the breast cancer side.
Yeah, that's super. It's like super cool stuff, and also it's frustrating because you said it's about 10 years. I'd actually counter and say it's probably closer to 20. What we're seeing in the literature usually starts to get out into clinical practice at a delayed rate of like 2 decades. Unfortunately, like now we're only now being like, what this WHI thing?
Maybe scary. It's so scary, honestly, right? Because again, the lay patient really doesn't have a clue, so you're going in,
right?
And again, this is nothing against doctors, right? I think the system has set them up where that's how it works, right? Like it's how do you even guidelines, right? I mean, I know this speaking to people from guidelines and whatnot, like how rigid they can be or how unwilling even with new data they will be to move the needle. And this is bureaucracy, this is liability risk. There's so many things that are not medicine that make their way into this decision making, and ultimately, unfortunately, patients are the losers then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, I want to get back to dosage and maybe also monitoring in terms of sort of dispelling some of the worry around testosterone. So you've mentioned 1 or 2 pills, taken in the morning, and then is there a second? Is it for women or maybe for men? Maybe it's easier to answer it for men, and then carve out the female answer. What does the dosage look like? What might that look like as of now, where someone might be prescribing it, a physician might be prescribing it off label? And then the second question or the follow-up there is, what are some of the monitoring, what are some of the symptoms that a woman or man need to be looking for to report back to their doctor? So for example, with estrogen or progesterone, actually, we want to look for any new bleeding, right? So if there's any vaginal bleeding, we want to be watching that and reporting that back to our doctor so we can monitor it to figure out if the dosing is right, if they need to monitor it or change it, etc. So same question, dosage for T, and then also monitoring for potential side effects.
So dosage on the male side for Kaisertrex is our most common doses are 300 milligrams BID or 400 milligrams BID. So you are taking this twice a day, 2 capsules twice a day. And then in terms of monitoring, I'd say...
So 150 and 200 each capsule?
Yeah, the capsules are 150 milligram size and 200 milligram size, correct. Yeah. It's like a fish oil capsule, right?
Yeah, okay.
Because it's a soft gel. It's not a pill per se. But in terms of the monitoring, it's twofold. Blood work, right? What are you checking in terms of, again, you obviously can check the levels, but that's really more of a symptomatic thing. And if you feel good, then that's what clinicians are mostly monitoring. But safety, you will look at, a big one here is hematocrit. So on the male side, so that's your red blood count. And often on injections, historically on injections, that could run high, right? There's data that looks at even 66% of patients on injection therapy have elevated hematocrit levels. And that's definitely been a concern for providers historically, and I think a major reason why.
Is that transient when you first start?
It's not necessarily transient, especially, again, if you think about super physiological levels for an extended period of time. On Kaisertrex, that hematocrit is sub 2% that would have an elevated level. So I think that's really something, and again, it's an important point to monitor regardless, but I think that's helping shift the paradigm in terms of providers and especially primary care providers who are thinking, hey, can I come back to this space and what are the risks? So that's important. again, on the male side, we like to check LH and FSH as well to see, what the activity levels are there. And then you look at PSA, right? That's again, going back to the prostate debate, you're always checking that because, again, what the data would show is, testosterone can actually help identify like an underlying cancer that's there. So that's actually, I think that's also part of the misnomer there is that it's causing it, but it's actually helping expose that. And speak to enough clinicians, there will be a similar story there. On the female side, switching over there, again, the doses for females are generally 1/10. In our development program, what we are going to aim at is somewhere between a 20 and 60 milligram dose. Again, this is titratable because, again, everybody's different and how they respond. But I think you're mainly going to be looking at symptom relief for females from a monitoring perspective. You want to monitor that the levels are not shooting too high, but a lot of these side effects, and actually I'll go back to the male first in a second, the side effects are often self-reported, right? If you see something like, unwanted hair growth or deepening of the voice or hair, right? These are often, you may have sensitivities to androgens at certain levels, but often dose-dependent activities. So titrations are really important. Again, and pellets don't let you do that properly. So titrations are really important. Again, back to the male side, when I look at, what are the doctors that we deal with monitoring from a symptomatic perspective, yes, they'll report how they're feeling and so forth. But some of the ones that will say, hey, look, maybe we need to make a dose adjustment often come down to like mood, anxiety, irritability, right? Those are not common by any means, but can be triggered. Testosterone can trigger them at the wrong doses.
I think it's also one of the things I think is important to also carve out here. When you're looking at blood work for women, you don't necessarily have to have low T to get on testosterone therapy. I think that that's important. And I think that would be true for men as well. I think that it is really important to think about the clinical representation of the patient. So if the patient feels like I have brain fog, I can't remember things, I have, I'm walking around in this haze, I can't make decisions, I'm noticing I'm losing my strength. So I was able to squat, I don't know, whatever, 150 pounds. And now I can't make that weight anymore. Mm-hmm. And even, libido for women. Certainly, if you're noticing, I love my husband or I love my partner and I just like, he's ready to go and I'm just not. I think that these are all very, very important considerations. And so when you're looking for blood work for women, I think it's also, and maybe I'd love for you to maybe expand on this, that you don't necessarily have to have low T to get on testosterone therapy. You just can't have like super physiological levels of T and say, hey, I want more,
Exactly. No, I think that's fair. And we see that mirrored on the male side too, again, because the ranges are so wide and what is actually appropriate for an individual varies. So there's, it's an optimization piece to a certain degree. But again, like you said, what best example is on the male side I'll still use, and before I go back to the female side,
we love our men. Yes, we love men.
It's just easy to kind of
yes, of course.
But what's nice is that it does translate. I don't think it has to be, again, this is not just for us, but clinicians kind of hearing this, often our board certified urologist or PCPs or endocrinologists that we're working with, they'll say, look, under a certain level, maybe it's 400 nanograms per deciliter. They'll say, look, you can try. Yeah, let's try this and let's see how you do. There's no harm because you may see these improvements. Because you might need to be at 800 or 1,000 nanograms per deciliter. Just because, again, you're not technically low T doesn't mean you're not going to benefit from therapy. If you're already at 1,000, maybe that's not the solution. But I think the same thing is going to happen for the female side. We just need more providers speaking about it, willing to try a therapy that is not harmful, right? And say, okay, let me give you this trial and see how you do and go from there, right? Because again, if it's transient peaks, they're coming down throughout the day, you don't have side effects, why not, right? And I think we have safety data to show even higher levels of testosterone not being harmful.
Yeah, and it's the transient peaks, I think, that is sort of critical to this conversation. It's not like the pellet where you have consistent levels for 3 or 4 months, as we were discussing earlier. It's like you're taking something It's metabolized in the body. It reaches this peak, and then there's a trough, right? So it's like you have it. It's up and it's down, and it's these physiological levels. It's not like we're giving women like 300. It's like you're dosing them at 300. You're giving them. I was just been making notes as you've been talking, like 20 to 60. Like I've had labs come back, and I've had. When you sort of reading the patient value and then like what they consider normal. Like I've seen labs where it's 0 is considered normal, and it's like this is wrong. Like 0 is not acceptable. It's not an acceptable level for T in a woman.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think providers have to get comfortable, and the ones that do see clinically patients day in and day out and see the outcomes and monitor the safety and so forth, they know this, right? You just need the broader. It's just unfortunately for patients, it's like finding a needle in a haystack, right? Finding that good provider that can take care of him.
So how do we talk to our providers? Because this is a big problem. I think I hear this in the United States. This is a big problem in Canada as well. Now, they're two slightly different systems. In the United States, I think there's a little bit more, I don't know if the word is permission, but that's the word I can think of right now. It's like if I don't like what this doctor's telling me, I'm going to go and find another provider, right? Yep. But in Canada, because there is, and I will say this, being a Canadian, now I'm very blessed. I have just the best, like my MD is like my friend, like wonderful relationship with her. But many people don't have that.
It's sort of spawned, for better or worse, like an alternative system, right? Obviously in the US, we have a lot of functional medicine doctors. We have a lot of concierge doctors and so forth. In Canada, I've definitely seen even telehealth rising, right? In the last couple of years.
Yes, there's a lot of telehealth in Canada. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. So it's just like, again, these wouldn't exist, honestly, if patients didn't need them. So I think they're good, right? And they're helping progress the dialogue and giving people, there's enough information online, right, to kind of arm the patient. But it really depends on how willing is your physician to hear this, right? And I've heard that, and this has honestly happened to us personally, all the way from pediatrics through, right, our own personal care, when we bring up topics or research or studies because we spend the time and bring it up to the physician, you'll know very quickly, like, are they open to this? Are they going to dismiss you, right? And yeah, like you mentioned, maybe it's easier to sort of fire and find a new provider here in the US, but I think the same, I'm sure Canada will sort of catch up in the sense that these alternative channels, and not alternative in a weird way in that sense, just outside of the government pay system, will continue to sprout and serve patients, really well.
Are there other forms of testosterone right now that are similar in their delivery, like this lymphatic absorption that we've been talking about with Kaisertrex, that are available to market right now? And is it available in the United States only? Is it where can patients, if they're looking for it, where can they find it?
Right. So there is another oral on the market here in the U.S., but the approach is very different, right? Kaisertrex has gone out sort of counterintuitively on a cash basis because that was the best way to get access, for people to get access, rather than our insurer, our payers and PBMs. When a new drug comes to market, the first move is to block it, right? Not available, too expensive, and so forth. So I think we're the most accessible drug by far here in the U.S. in terms of oral testosterone, and again, our approach is just different. That's why we're out educating kind of every day, talking about the therapy. All boats will rise, but I think Kaisertrex is sort of synonymous with oral testosterone. We are actually, probably by the time this airs, this should be approved in Canada. So we have Canadian approval underway. We have UK approval underway. We're looking at multiple Asian markets today and the Middle East. So we are rapidly bringing Kaisertrex around the world.
And as of this recording, we just have a male version, but certainly a physician can decide to say, hey, we can try this off label. You're mentioning before, for currently right now, there's like 150 and 200 pills. So how would somebody take that?
There's also a 100 milligram capsule pill.
Oh, there's 100 mgs as well. Okay.
Yeah, it's not used too much because, again, you can replicate it with the 200 milligrams. So it simplifies patient.
So you might be just cutting that in half if you're a woman. You might be just like splitting it in half.
I can't tell you that. I can't tell you what to do.
If someone were to theoretically, if there was an off-label prescription, they would take the lowest dosage and then split it up.
So we're going to, again, our trials are going to aim for this 20 to 60 milligram range zone. Yeah. We think that will deliver the proper levels for females.
Yes, I like the CYA answer there. That's great. I like the cover your ass answer. Okay, so
I'd like to talk about a lot of things. There's some
Yes.
things I will definitely get in trouble for.
Okay. Awesome. No, that's completely fair. Certainly, we want to be abiding by the prescriber rules and the regulatory bodies and all of that. So I completely respect that. And I ask it because I know that there are a lot of physicians in Canada and the States that use testosterone products that are designed for men off-label for their female patients. So that's me just
yeah, no, absolutely. It happens every day,
yeah.
right? So I think that's totally fair. But yeah, we're really excited about at least putting these into trials and producing the data. I'm sure there will be posters, abstracts, et cetera, that show just the efficacy and safety, right? I think it's been much needed. We have a good hunch on this working, and frankly, it's just an unmet need. That's right. That's the way to put it. There's an unmet need.
And do you have an estimated project timeline for the female product that we were talking about?
So I would like to complete phase 3 trials in 27.
Okay, great. Well, I hope that you'll come back in 27 when, if you've gone through all the phases, you've jumped through all the hoops that the FDA and Health Canada and everybody's going to put you through. I'd love to have you back on to talk about that product if and when it comes to market, because I think that, as we've been saying, there's a big need for women. And I think what you're doing in terms of educating just around testosterone in general, like what it does like what does it do in the human body, like, sex agnostic, and then we can layer on some of these nuances for the male and female body. I mean, I don't see a lot of pharmaceutical companies doing that, which I think is commendable. So I think that this has been fantastic. So I know I've been to your website. I know that there's telehealth providers that are listed there. So for people who have access, who may be in the States right now, where can people find is it telehealth providers, or can you go into your doctor's office and say, hey, I want Kaiser? Like, how does it work if people are
couple
looking
ways.
to get this
I mean,
product?
again, you can absolutely go to your doctor's office and request it. I don't, depending on how familiar they are or not, right, that will drive that discussion. But if you go to our website, kaisertrex.com, you can find you can find a provider, brick and mortar, that you can go and see, and if makes sense, can get on therapy. Or yes, we have telehealth providers as well that are covering 50 states across this country. I anticipate we'll have Canada early in 26 as well. But you can go on there, find one that fits sort of your, let's call it, ethos, right? We have longevity providers through traditional kind of more simple, streamlined HRT providers. And so there's a mix for everybody depending on what your goals are. But yeah, our goal is access. At the end of the day, it's education and access, and we want to reduce barriers to therapy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been phenomenal and wonderfully informative. And we will make sure that all of those links that we talked about are in the show notes. So make sure if you're listening, you can go to the show notes and find a provider if you are in the States right now, or 26 if you're in Canada. And then I'm sure that there's going to be a rollout in the UK and Europe and the Commonwealth, Australia and all the places shortly thereafter as well. So thank you so much, Shalin. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie. It's been a pleasure.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to the after party, where I tell you exactly what I thought of this episode. And I think when we are talking about this episode in particular, I think it is very clear that there is just not enough information about testosterone for women. That was maybe the biggest through line that I got from our conversation. So certainly, men, we love men. We love men, right? I'm raising men. I'm married to men. We love men, but they are easier to study. They have been studied more extensively. Don't have a menstrual cycle. Don't go through perimenopause and menopause. Andropause, not the same thing. And so we're just kind of guessing with women when it comes to hormone replacement therapy. And I think this is where clinicians who are using HRTs, and testosterone will be included in that off-label, really are the pioneers that are paving the way for women to just have the opportunity to age in the way that men are given the opportunity to. So I mentioned this, kind of early in our conversation, where it's like, men have like a whole suite of options available to them for any, erectile dysfunction or low T or whatever. They have 10, 20, maybe 30 different products available to them. And women, we got none. We got nothing. So I think that all women are really asking for is like, can we just age like our male counterparts? And so I thought that this conversation was important to bring to the table and have it because we have this CEO of this pharmaceutical company who is creating a product for men. It's available for men right now, and now is looking at creating a product for females. And I think that this is going to be super duper important. My hope is by the time that this podcast airs, that we are either very close to having this available in all the countries that we talked about. So certainly it's available now in the United States, but my hope is for my Canadians who are always listening and they're like, what about me? That it'll be available for you too, or very shortly thereafter. So a couple things that I really liked in terms of what we talked about is that testosterone is not just for libido. And this is, again, coming back to this, like the only reason as a woman as of today that you can get TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, is for hyposexual desire disorder. So it's not just a libido thing. And if you are certainly in a committed couple, that we definitely want to be treating both sides of the equation. We can't just treat the penis and ignore the vagina, right? We want to be thinking about both the male and the female. But I loved how he talked about this idea that testosterone is not just a reproductive hormone. It's not just about libido, but we have androgen receptors. So androgens, testosterone being a part of that, are all over the body. They're on the heart, they're in the brain, they're on the lungs, certainly in the muscle. And so there is this profound effect that testosterone has systemically in the body. And he even mentioned it briefly when he was talking about the capacity for testosterone to influence mitochondrial biogenesis, so that's the production of new cells that are going to create energy, and also to reduce oxidative stress. That is one of the big markers of aging, is that inflammaging, right? So that like those inflammatory markers as we age just get higher and higher and higher and higher, and testosterone can help to quell that, can help to sort of pull that back. So loved that part of the conversation. I also like the looking at our lab markers as a nice baseline. I think that if you are able to, if you don't have to fight with your doctor, to get some type of baseline in terms of your total testosterone, free testosterone, and SHBG, I think that would be absolutely wonderful for you if you were smart enough or able enough, had the access to get it when you were in your 20s, phenom. And if you were not able to, try to get something now, because then you'll be able to triangulate that with symptoms should they get worse. So I thought that was really fantastic. I also thought that the looking for some of the signs and symptoms of supraphysiological levels, or if you're having a bad reaction to testosterone, was important. Again, all been studied in men. We don't have a ton of data on women, but generally for women, that virilization piece. So looking for the deepening of the voice, looking for excess hair, let's say around the chin and chest, like that hirsutism, the development, like the acceleration of bone density. Often for women, we tend to see it, not always, but tend to see it in the mandible. We'll also see it in the shoulders too. And then that clitoral enlargement as well. So looking out for that. He also mentioned hematocrit for men. And I actually loved that he said that testosterone is sort of myth busting a little bit around this fallacy that testosterone is one of the causatives or corollaries with cardiovascular disease. So really talking about how testosterone, in fact, does the opposite. It looks like it improves endothelial function, so the ability of the lining of our arteries to expand and contract. And then in the case of men, it looks as well when we are able to, when a man is on testosterone therapy, it doesn't cause prostate cancer, but can actually help to uncover maybe a hidden, silently growing tumor, whether it's benign or malignant on the prostate. So I thought that these were also very, very good. I loved that they are announcing that they are now looking at a female specific product, which should be available. I think we were talking about this when we stopped recording, or maybe it was on the recording. I can't remember. Sometime in 2027. They're looking to complete, it was on the recording, completing phase 3 trials in 2027, which I think is very, very exciting. It's like, we're doing it, fam. It's like we're making progress and people are listening to these needs. So I thought that was really fantastic. And I will certainly be watching this pharmaceutical company in particular as they are expanding beyond the United States to the worldwide consumers, which, it's not just that we love our Americans, but certainly Americans need help, but so do North Americans, so do Europeans, so do, Middle East people in the Middle East, et cetera. So I'm very much looking forward to the development of this product specifically for women. And, you can kind of tell every time I pushed him, I'm like, tell me about the women. He's like, well, it's like, we don't really know, but this is my best guess. So my hope is that we'll start to fill in those gaps with the research that Kaisertrex or that Marius Pharmaceuticals is conducting over the next several years. So I hope that you found this informative, maybe something exciting to look forward to in terms of your own health journey. Let me know in the comments if you are going to be leaving a comment on Apple or Spotify. We read them all. And until next time, I bid you adieu.